Hi all, my name is Lora, as Kate mentioned. I don't know if I'll manage to shake you like her, but I hope you enjoy the talk. So I'm a researcher at the Creative Research and Innovation Center, and we're running a project on life experiences and festivals with particular focus on UNBOXED. And we started our study a year ago following recommendations from the Boundless Creativity Report that suggested that we should learn from UNBOXED and its team model in fostering cross-sector innovation. There are also multiple voices in festival studies and industry studies that are suggesting that we can use festivals as innovation test beds. So our project started with the idea to explore UNBOXED and its 10 commissions in terms of creative technology, audience experiences, and new modes of production. Also, when we initiated the project, it was also interesting to somehow try to understand intrinsic definitions of creative R&D and innovation, the way they've embedded in creative practice within the creative teams, and having in mind the thematic compositions of all the projects, also try to reflect whether creative R&D could play a role in driving solutions to societal challenges. The research design of the project, so our research questions revolve around use of immersive technologies for connecting diverse communities and participatory experiences in building diverse audiences together. Also new modes of production and world building in designing hybrid experiences in the post-pandemic context, as well as sustainable business models and potential socio-economic legacies coming from the UNBOXED project. It's a kind of small qualitative studies. I've been running semi-structured interviews with the commission, some representatives of creative tech companies, as well as conducting ethnographic visits to the projects and literature review on creativity innovation in order to provide contextualized understanding of all the projects. The cross-cutting teams that are emerging, you've been following the program in the last couple of months and today, we can see that some of the commissions are dealing with the topic of empathy, the way I've defined it. So they're using a cosmic perspective to reconsider our relationships and establish universal values and cross the economy between us and them division to cross boundaries and borders. Other group of projects are connectingly working with diversity and inclusion, such as Story Trails, Dream Machine by Collective Act. We heard from them that they're establishing forms of perceptual diversity, and Pollinations, who are building parallels between biodiversity and cultural diversity that we'll be discussing further. Another group of projects are specifically dealing with sustainability and environmental sustainability, as Dandelion, with reimagining growth as a creative act and through virtual and vertical gardens. And also Green Space Dark Skies by Walk the Plank, as well as Sea Monster that we can experience in Western Supermare currently. That it's a extraordinary work, public art work, using renewable energies. And all of these topics are somehow coming together into Go What that we will discuss further with during our panel. Here are some of the industry perspectives that emerged from our conversations. You've heard today, many of you are actually here, but what is somehow interesting that creative R&D has been recurringly defined as process of iteration, experimentation, and risk-taking. Here's a quote from Lysander Ashton for 59 Productions, who basically discusses creative R&D as inseparable from the process of creativity and design processes. Dev Joshi from Collective Act also mentioned that innovation emerges when technology becomes invisible, which is an interesting observation. And he shared that for him, the biggest compliment is when the audiences don't ask how the experience works, but they just enjoy it. We also had a conversation in general what creativity means, so that creativity can be conceptualized beyond professional practice, for instance, with Angela Chan, who is director of, head of inclusion at Story Trails. And she suggested that as TV professionals are trying to format authentic storytelling, where is the role of artistic expression if we cannot go beyond fixed formats? Also from our conversations with Angela, she suggested, because she's also running her own doctoral study, on inclusive innovation, that story trails, one of the commissions, should be understood in terms of inclusive innovation. And what was also very interesting in our research was to understand story trails R&D model, that we could see it's influenced by the Creative Clusters program and Audience of the Future program, as Story Futures is one of the creative clusters, and also Story Futures Academy have been at the forefront of educating the next generation of talent in immersive storytelling. And in a recent piece, I'm trying to define and articulate what are the possible creative R&D practices for inclusive innovation. So on the one hand, they're structural, sector-related, the way story trails have been upskilling underrepresented voices in the creative industries. Also, design-centered or applied. As we know, story trails have been working on open inclusion, in lowering barriers to technology and establishing accessible spaces, thematic. Mostly of the projects within UNBOXED and also specifically in story trails are building a sense of diversity and inclusion in terms of crossing boundaries between cultural diversity, gender diversity, and also holistic forms of inclusion that emerged from our interviews with Claire Doherty and Gawat, that it's also, after all, a perception towards the world. The immersive experiences designed within story trails, we heard yesterday about the AR trails, which are fascinating in terms of reusing BBC and BFI archives to uncover local histories, and also the VR experiences that have been produced within the immersive challenge, R&D challenge, supported by the Creative Clusters program. So in terms of creative expression, we can see that archives are being reused in very similar approach to the way, for instance, Black Audio Film Collective and John O'Comfort have been using newsreels in order to represent multiplicity of voices. Another group of projects, as we mentioned, are more oriented towards sustainable innovation, and probably it's also relevant to outline the international context on multiple initiatives coming together that are trying to define the role of creative industries for climate action. Last year, the United Nations, of course, announced the Year of Creative Economy for Sustainable Development. We have initiatives, the new European Bauhaus, they emerged from the European Green Deal, which is a very similar piece of legislation to the UK net zero strategy. And yesterday we heard from Julius Bicycle, for instance, for the role of industry-led and grassroots initiatives and how they're leading the way towards sustainable futures. What is emerging within the UNBOXED commissions, I somehow tend to position them within a long-term practice of sustainable arts and community arts, or what, for instance, Joseph Beuys has defined as art as a social sculpture, when he wanted to discuss the role of creativity in shaping society. And as we know, one of his most famous projects is planting 100 trees. And we see certain conceptual parallels with projects like Pollinations or Dandelion, who are reimagining planting and growing. So in this sense, there is a certain shift from physical to digital context of sustainable art projects. On the other hand, what is also emerging is that in building a cultural shift and green consciousness, some of the projects are dealing thematically with sustainability, or they're creating narratives about sustainability, while what's possibly more challenging for the creative industries is to also employ sustainable practices that we've been discussing in the last 2 days. In this sense, I would mention the sea monsters and Dandelion as two examples of circular systems, sea monsters, so they're using renewable energies. We know very well that having kinetic sculptures by sculptor Ivan Black, they're also using solar power, wind power to generate the irrigation systems of their own gardens. So they're reimagining a form of sustainable future. Similarly, Dandelion somehow, I think, employing models of creative cooperatives as they're trying to destabilize capitalist forms of production and put the production means in the hands of the audience. Some of the conversations, of course, emerged around the pandemic and the fact that the whole industry sector was frozen. Nikki Halifax, for instance, from New Substance, who worked on Sea Monster, mentioned that that was very much dependent on the fact that decisions were taken by people possibly who don't go to festivals, which also raises certain questions on governance models and the need for possibly direct participation of creatives in decision-making. What's possibly more interesting in thinking about the future of life experiences, and here I have outlined some of the emerging trends and creative strategies within UNBOXED. So we see that most of the projects are employing community-led forms of storytelling and do-it-yourself practices. There is an element of overcoming fear of technology that also emerged within my conversations with the Digital Catapult in relation to their traveling showcase, Immersive Arcade. In terms of trying to democratize digital content creation, I think it's also very much relevant to discuss forms or necessary forms of media literacy or immersive literacy. So in this sense, probably very idealistically, we can rethink the metaverse as a co-creative space and space that ultimately should connect people across different cultures. We can see that projects like GAWAD merging media modalities across screen and live performance, which is of course very intelligently reflected by CoStar, and creating integrated creative experiences across real and virtual spaces. And we've been talking on multiple occasions about ABBA. I haven't taken a chance on this experience yet, but I remember 20 years that the Gorillaz emerged as an avatar band, that I think that already at that point blurred the boundary between real and virtual space. So probably it's already at that point they defined the future of what could be life experiences now. And what I can also observe across all the projects is that this whole beautiful concept of world building, on the one hand, should be considered as a form of creative technology, and on the other hand, as a form of social responsibility. What is the world that we're building creatively? I think that's GAWA specifically is questioning, and we'll discuss that further. So some of our emerging findings towards critical and creative media literacy, as I mentioned, I think it's obvious that UNBOXED has uncovered that creativity is intrinsic not only for the ecosystem of arts, but for all STEM disciplines. So in this sense, it can be mainstreamed and translated into transversal skill across school disciplines. I think it's also very important to introduce curriculum trainings in critical and immersive media literacies if you want to embrace the creative potential of immersive technologies and democratize media use. And I think maybe if not today, at some point UNBOXED will be also studied as an example, best practice of sustaining creative autonomy. As usually arts funding goes with a certain agenda, and once creatives are funded, they've been expected to perform certain forms of propaganda, if you want. And as we've heard today, and as we know from the whole program, most of the commissions have been able to subvert and deconstruct such expectations. Some suggestions and observations towards an inclusive creative economy. Possibly we can scale up the R&D practices within UNBOXED, specifically within story trails, into networked structured practices of creative R&D in order to enable inclusive creative economy. Also can use UNBOXED community-centered and innovative modes of storytelling and world building in order to imagine probably the governance of participatory and inclusive metaverse ecosystem. Some reflections in relation to sustainability. I think all of the commissions somehow are offering and employing elements of speculative design, if you want, and transformative future scenarios who can potentially inform participatory policy co-design in relation to addressing societal challenges. And in this sense, I think it's also necessary to build the evidence base for the creative sector by engaging with creative practice and the voice of the industry, since many sector solutions are already envisioned within creative R&D processes. And I guess one of the impacts of UNBOXED will be that it's building a widespread creative culture by bringing technology, imagination, creativity for free to large audiences. And I think that possibly in order to sustain this momentum, we also have to transition from creative culture to creative economy by developing possibly sustainable business models. So at this point, I will conclude with my presentation, and I'm very happy that actually we have a panel to deconstruct everything that I have told you so far in a more dialogical approach. And our panel is trying to discuss the connection between creative technology and civil storytelling. What could I say from an academic perspective? That possibly 15 years ago, when Henry Jenkins wrote Convergence Culture, when all the new media collide, and he was discussing the democratic potential of storytelling, of transmedia storytelling and user-generated content, somehow all of this was a hype that he even revisioned later at some point. But media convergence nowadays is a reality, and what is still probably challenging is to establish the practices of using media creatively and meaningfully and critically. And I think there is a certain trajectory between technology turning into creative technology and then creative technology being employed as a medium of creative expression. So basically that's what we're going to discuss today, and please give a warm welcome to our panelists, Gettin Evans from Gawat and Rachel Wakelin from Peter and Paul.